So, episode 2 of what we're now calling the Seedy Podcast, because we asked a pair of 15-year-olds because we wanted to get a more mature opinion.
Okay, yeah, I'm not quite sure about that, but anyway, we'll go with it for now.
But
anyway.
that's what. I mean, to be fair, you literally have a packet of seeds like sitting right in front of you. So.
My whole life has been based around seed.
So, I mean, it is a running thing through the whole thing.
Okay.
So for now, it's the seed. Oh, right, the window's opening. It's the Poltergeist Podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
So this will be the Seedy Podcast. You're Nigel, I'm John. We're not going into deep introductions again. We're just going to pick up from where we left off. So we covered the kind of formative years of your career. We're going to skip to now starting with all things rural. So getting back, in enacting the grey matter to get back to that time, how did you come to be running all things rural?
Very good question, yeah. So I suppose without doing my usual rambling on, I suppose I watched the previous one and I suppose, I'm like, it's all about purpose and why am I telling this message? So I suppose I keep questioning myself, is it just so I get a chance to ramble on about how amazing I am and what I've done, or is there a deeper purpose? And I suppose the deeper purpose is probably to show people or to demonstrate that if I can do it, anybody can do it. And I think, that's probably why I tell the story. So I suppose in reality, John, I mean, I had a proper job, I was a director of a big seed company, a big international seed company, and had a lovely car and a regular salary and all the things that go with it, and lots of people working for me. And then almost overnight, that business was sold. I didn't fit in. I'm the least corporate character you'd ever meet. And I suppose all things were, if I'm honest, and that's why I share the story. I started because I'd run out of employers, and I'd managed basically, I couldn't go off and get any more jobs in the seed trade. I'd either worked for them or I'd been a fairly stiff competitor. So all things rural was sort of born out of...
well, you couldn't really go back to being seed mixing and,
Well, I think there already was. I suppose, I saw it as an opportunity. So to cut a very, very rambling story short, I rented a farm. So I've been single for a while. I just met Becky, in a chance conversation down the pub one night. He sort of mentioned he had a farm and wasn't getting on the tenant farmer. Me being me, never really think things through. I said, I'll rent the farm off you. Bearing in mind I had no money at the time, I had nowhere to live. So I rented the farm at Red Hill, 180 acres, took it on. I'd been working for a big Irish PLC and they were getting out of agriculture at the time. So I knew that the job was going to come to an end there. So I skipped off in sort of the early part of 2004, took on the farm. I think I had £9,000 in my bank account when I started. And I set up a deal with a friend of mine to run the farm as a commercial farm. I had no machinery, I had no cash. We did a joint venture on growing a wheat crop, which is you'd like to think it's fairly straightforward. And in the first year, I actually managed to sort of achieve the unachievable and actually losing most of my $9,000 because we actually, the cost of production was greater than our yield. So I didn't start on a very good footing. The seed business, I was doing a little bit of trading from the back bedroom, and I can always remember my first day, bearing in mind I had no money and I just rented this farm and actually paid some rent. I'd managed to persuade a German company, Freudenberger, who I dealt with for many years, to give me a credit line. And again, you look back upon my naivety, I actually flew over to their head office in Crefeld, back in sort of May of 2004. Yeah. So I rocks up there. Manfred Freudenberger was the owner, sat in the boardroom, and he said, well, basically, lovely to see you. What do you want? And I said, well, I want to set up my own business. So he said, have you got any money? No. Have you got any property? No. What are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to start trading seed, which I've been doing at that point for probably 20 years. And he said, what do you want? I said, well, I need a £250,000 credit line. And he said, well, you're going to pay me back? I said, well, if you don't pay me back, I'll find myself in a ditch somewhere. And with that, he literally said, okay.
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. He said, okay, fine. So I literally was that naive. I had no business plan. I had no budgets. I had no strategy document. Literally, I was going to sell seed. Went back to the airport, jumped on a plane, came back to Red Hill, which I was sort of renting the farm at this time. Badly, I did a bad job being a farmer, and I can always remember the first day. I can remember sitting at a desk with a phone and a blank piece of paper, and starting to ring people and look for an order. And I can remember phoning big customer, Moore Valley Farmers, talked to the seed manager, who basically told me he wasn't interested, didn't want anything. And I think it was that just horrible reality that, you know, I had no income, I had no plan, you know, I had no salary, and I'd gone from quite a good job. And that was it. So that was 2004. First year I managed to get going. So I managed to actually sell £1 million worth of seed, which was all, we didn't touch it. We didn't physically touch it. It was all traded. And yeah, it grew from there. And I suppose it's a bit weird. You look back on it. I can always remember one day I was driving to Ulster, which is the local town, and I needed some fuel. I needed some food. And I had literally got to the stage I had no money at all. I can remember a customer phoning, and I made £100 in that call selling some turnips. And I can remember then sort of putting the phone down, then driving to Ulster and putting £40 worth of fuel in my car and £60 worth of, you know, food on my credit card, because I knew I'd made £100 profit on that deal. And it's weird, in those early days it was literally like that.
I think that's an important pick it as we are going through this, to pick lessons out and so on. I think that is probably an important thing to understand, that because like All Things Rural was from the ground up, so it wasn't like you bought a company and kind of like took it over. You created it from the bottom, and in those early days, to varying degrees, it can often feel like you have no idea what you're doing, and like you're just at the bottom end of a massive hill with no clue how you're going to get to the top.
Yeah.
But things like going and speaking to people, there is an awful lot of value, I think, in that thing of remembering that if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah, and I think it's your previous history. It's like Freudenberger. I'd known them 20 years by that stage. They did know me. I had traded with them. I had done what I said I was going to do. I'd obviously hadn't badly upset them, otherwise they wouldn't have taken a risk on me. And I suppose that's what I try and convey to people. You know, you have to, you know, life's not a popularity contest, but you have to try and be straight with people. You have to tell the truth, because you always pay the price. You know, it's, you know, if I'd welshed on a deal with Freudenberger 10 years before and I'd really annoyed them or upset them, when I rocked up, they'd have gone, do you know what? We don't want to take the risk. But I suppose that's where I've been very lucky. You know, I've been supported by a number of people through my career. You know, Brian Jones, who gave me my first job when I got kicked out of school, embarrassingly. Roy Harris, when I started the seed trade. You know, they saw something in me. I am a pretty irritating individual. I wouldn't be the most organised, but I suppose they saw a bit of commercial opportunity. And I think the All Things Rural start off was, you know, perhaps an example to a lot of people, young and old. If you're going to have a go, you know, you just have to be brave enough to. And I had it was easy in a way for me, because I had no plan B. I didn't have anything to fall back on. So to be quite blunt about it, you know, anything over sitting in a cardboard box on the side of the road was better than nothing. I didn't, you know, and I had nothing to lose. You know, I had no house, I had no money, I had no job.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite motivating to not have a plan B. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing to have a plan B, but I think if you're kind of, you know, you are kind of focused by that whole thing of if you don't have a plan B, you've got to make plan A work, and that makes you think more creatively about how you're going to do it, because you've got no option to go like, it's just not going to work, and give up, you know. So All Things Rural obviously has worked, because we're sitting in it.
It's quite weird. Yeah, I look at it now, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. I look at it now and you think we've just opened up a new site. You know, just invested £3 million in a new production and warehousing site. You know, we've got, you know, we're turning over 14-15 million quid a year. You know, employing grown-ups. We've got a financial. You know, it's like we've got an finance director, and it used to be me.
What are All Things Rural now doing then? Because you started out just trading seeds and turnips, apparently.
Yeah, turnips.
But what are you actually doing now as All Things Rural?
So All Things Rural, basically, we're wholesaling about 4,000 tonnes of seed a year, selling that to 350 UK-based companies, ranging from landscapers, supermarkets, local authorities, agricultural merchants, agronomy companies, online sellers. And I suppose what we're doing is we're the white label packers that are supporting them with, you know, we're basically people that are producing the seed, buying the seed, mixing it, packing it. So you go into a supermarket and you buy a little packet of lawn seed and wildflowers, there's a chance that we will have been involved in the supply of the seed or packing it. So we're the behind the scenes people that are there supplying the industry. We probably do 18% of the UK market. It's not a big market, but it's very specialised.
18% is a decent chunk of it when you consider there's quite a lot of other big companies doing it.
Yeah, some big players, and to be fair, and we're all about people. I mean, the other thing as well, I suppose, and part of this podcast is, I've been very lucky to be here because people supported and backed me. As I keep reiterating, I'm not easy. I'm quite volatile, quite unpredictable.
I think the term you're looking for is neurodivergent.
Oh, okay. Well, I try not. I don't label myself. I just think I'm brilliant. But I suppose what I'm trying to get across is that don't take these things as being a disabilities don't hold you back. Use them. So I suppose I don't take no for an answer. If somebody says I can't do something, that drives me on to be even more determined. I accept failure. Again, there is a danger with these podcasts. It's all about successes. I've had plenty of businesses that have failed. I think I've started 2 farm shops, both of which have failed spectacularly. I've got a leisure business that's probably still losing money as I sit here today. And there's many in between. And I've got many deals that I could take you to where, I'll tell you about all the success stories. I've got plenty of deals where I took a speculative position on seed and lost money. So I think what I've learned at my age and what I try and convey to people is that when it gets tough, you've just got to stick in and keep going.
I think that's the difficult lesson to learn is that, and it's a difficult one to teach as well, is you need to learn how to handle failure because it's coming.
Yeah.
There's always going. You're going to have the client that makes you do a load of work and then just goes bankrupt and doesn't pay you.
Yeah.
Or you're going to. You're going to put all your eggs in one basket, and that basket's going to turn out to have a hole in the bottom. All these kind of things. Metaphors aside.
Yeah, totally.
Stuff happens, and I think we probably should get into some of that stuff because I think the fact that you're still here and you do have this business, and even with, do you want to refer to the leisure business, or is it?
Yeah, so I suppose it's probably one of my failings is so all things were all started in 2004. By sort of 10, 11, I had a young family. Seed industry or agriculture was having a tough time. So I took the decision to invest in leisure. So we bought a site which is now a zoo. So the zoo is called All Things Wild, has about 120,000 visitors a year. And my partner Becky and kids run that, do a really good job. And then rather stupidly in 2019, I accidentally bought a castle in Wales, which is an embryonic leisure business, which is starting to turn a corner.
But wasn't that a little bit more that you bought the land and the castle just happened to be on it?
Yeah, I mean, my driver was to basically, I suppose, if I'm honest, John, is that seed business was making money. If I didn't spend it on land, I was going to spend it on some other harebrained Nigel scheme. So in a way, I can't be trusted. So I know I can't trust myself. So I bought land, basically, and then found businesses that worked on that land. And that's been challenging, and I've learned a lot, and I haven't got it right all the time, but again, I suppose, I think the castle we're now on about, we've owned it for 7 years next week, actually, and I think I'm probably
7 years already.
7 years, I'm on my probably 9th, re-budgeted plan, but it's getting there, and it's just a question of keeping going, and I think I learnt that in the early days from people like Brian Jones and Roy Harris was, they were quite important characters in my life, and I suppose in a way that's why I'm doing this, is because I want to be that character in other people's lives, the one that's going, look, you can do it. There's been plenty of dark days, don't get me wrong, I've not been sat here with this sort of positive air forever. There's been some pretty difficult times, and teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, and it's those people that you can ring up and say, look, it's really going wrong, and they go, come on, just stick in. I mean, one of my, as you know, I do love a saying, and I suppose one of my favourite ones of the old Churchill thing is, often the darkest hour is just before dawn, and that has often kept me going, when I'm just about to roll over and think, do you know what, we're going to survive, and things do get better, and that's the trouble is, people just see people like me as being, this, linear success story that's just happened, and how lucky you are, and they don't see the other side. And I think that's one of the problems with modern media and television. It's all about success, and look how thin and attractive and amazing I am, but they don't see all the graft that goes behind it. And I suppose I'm willing to share my vulnerability with people because I'm the first to accept I've made some bad decisions, some stupid decisions. I've done some random things, but I'm still here, and listen, in a week's time I might get bank walked through that door and shut me down, and I'll be doing a podcast about what it's like to be shut. But I don't know. I try and learn from it. I try and grow from these experiences. But equally to share with other people at my age. I suppose what I'm trying to do is to share my knowledge. If I can help somebody avoid some of the things I've done, by giving them a bit of advice. I can't run their lives, but if I can show them where I perhaps got it wrong. Well, I
think one of the things we'll dig into is some of these bits where it did go wrong, because I think based on your experience and what you're actually trying to achieve with this, because getting back to basics of why we're even sitting here doing this conversation is that both of us have had times with our businesses, and still do with some bits of them, but both of us have been through the bit where the only difference between you and somebody who's gone shut down is that you refuse to give up.
Yeah.
And that's all very good, and it's good to have that kind of Dunkirk spirit and all the rest of it.
Yes.
But there are times where you have to turn around and say, this isn't working, it's time to draw a line on it.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the hardest things to figure out, and one of the hardest lessons to learn. And I know that you have had a few bits of various business ventures, and I think it might be worth looking into some of those and saying, this was the point where we were like, okay, well, we need to cut and run from this. And it's not,
no, I agree.
It's not, acknowledging a failure is not the same thing as admitting defeat.
No, and I think that's probably, and I hate people that go, my skills are, but I think one of my skills is I do know when to stop. I'm not totally ego driven. I do know when enough's enough, and I suppose I learnt that, to be fair, in my early days with trading seed, because sometimes you get it wrong and you just have to take a loss and move on. And the one really important lesson I learned in my early formative years in the seed industry was not to back trade. You get it wrong, you got the currency wrong, you bought it too expensively, the markets went against you, you got out of it, and you focus on making that money back.
Just for clarity, what's back trading?
Well, it's looking back, isn't it? It's like, I go and buy, 1,000 tons of red clover at €5 a kilo, and the market drops back to 450, and you end up selling it at a loss. It's very easy to go back and think, well, why did I buy it? And why didn't I think it through?
Yeah,
so I suppose I learned, and I was, back in the very early days, it was quite a brutal sort of commercial environment, and it was a very, very strict rule. You didn't back trade. You didn't trade backwards. You didn't look back at what you got wrong. You said, right, I got it wrong. I lost 50 grand. What your focus was, how you're going to make it back. And I think that's the thing often in business, is it's very easy to back trade. Why ddid I do that? Why didn't I do this?
Yeah.
Well, you can't change it. And I think that's probably the one thing that one of the biggest lessons I've learned, is that you have to take responsibility, you make decisions, and you have to own it. But there's no point wallowing in remorse and pity. Crack on and look for the next commercial opportunity. And often, on the back of some of my most spectacular failures, have come some of the most positive, opportunities. And I can name numerous. I can remember one of my most stupid things ever. I can remember a Saturday morning buying some seed from Canada in Canadian dollars, and in those days you didn't buy the kilo, you bought it per pound. So the old imperial measure. I was working out, so I had to work out pounds to kilos and Canadian dollars to sterling, and in the process of tapping away on my calculator, I got it wrong. I sold a container of seed at basically half what it cost. Now, I was mortified, and it was a lot of money in those days, perhaps £25,000, which was not that was like when I was earning 15 grand a year as salary. And I can remember being mortified, but and my boss said, well, there's no point moaning about it, crack on, go and
make 15 grand.
Go and make 15, 20 grand. And that's what I did. And I think that's probably what I see, and I'm very gifted to work with people that had confidence, and they could see that, they could have fired me. They could have said, you've made a massive mistake, Nigel, you're down the road. But in reality, they supported me, and I probably made 10 times that money because I was motivated to do it. And I think I was sharing a story with some colleagues the other day, and it was quite a funny one. I'd forgotten about it. I can remember one Friday night, I used to trade in US dollars, and we'd bought a lot of seed, in US and Canadian dollars on a Friday morning, and I was supposed to cover the currency. So we used to basically, to lock in the price, we would buy futures currency contracts on the futures market. It was my job to do it. Usual me faffing around on a Friday, got to about 4 o'clock and realised I'd missed the deadline. So I went to go and see my boss and say, I've sort of messed up, I haven't covered it. So he said, oh, don't worry about it, we'll sort it Monday morning. Anyway, during the weekend, there was some, I can't remember, I think it was something to do with Bill Clinton. There was this huge, anyway, sort of this a political event. Monday morning, the pound had basically strengthened, and I fundamentally made on paper about £95,000. Now, we joked about it in ineptitude. My ineptitude and stupidity in not covering the currency resulted in the company making a lot of money. Now, it could have gone the other way. And I think that's what, again, a really valuable lesson is, and that's how close it could be, and that could have been a really serious issue in those days. You're looking 25 years ago, £95,000 was a huge amount of money.
It's still quite a lot.
Yeah, it is still quite a lot now. And, so I suppose the point being that, it's
the equivalent amount. But
And I think that's what, and having lived these things and been involved in them for good and for bad, what you do learn is, so that didn't mean that I was an expert currency trader. It just meant that incompetence and ineptitude paid. But that the message was that I couldn't then just be strutting around, I've made 95 grand because I'm a genius, because I wasn't. But equally, when I lost money, the same thing applied.
I think the thing to look at that is that one of the hard lessons to understand is that there is a bit of luck involved, and
absolutely,
resilience is about how you can adapt to that luck, whether it's good luck or bad luck. Don't pat yourself on the back too much, like you said, but at the same time, don't beat yourself up when things just don't pan out, because sometimes they won't.
No, they won't. And you're right. Look, and you do need a bit of luck, but you also, it's a terribly hackneyed expression, but you do make yourself a bit of luck, and it comes back to real basic stuff, doesn't it? My I suppose its upbringing is my mother was quite, puritanical, came from Swansea, she was a bit old-fashioned, and it's things like, telling the truth, not being in trouble. I don't like getting into trouble. I'm really weird. I don't like speeding. I don't like being in trouble with the authorities. I don't like fiddling, I don't fiddle my taxes.
Which is weird, because you're one of the most anti-authority people I know. But
yeah, I am, but equally, I don't, it's like, I'm really sad bugger, my accountant is selected on the fact that he won't try and come up with any clever tax evasion scams, because I suppose it's all about doing what you say you're going to do, and I suppose luck often comes, it's like with our relationship, if I let you down or I abuse trust or anything else, then everything is soured, and I suppose that's I've learnt is that I work in a very small industry, and probably it was driven by the fact I'm still dealing with the same people I've dealt with for 40 years. Now, if I basically rip somebody off or take advantage of do something unethical, the problem is they will then, I haven't got a plan B. There aren't like millions of seed companies, so I suppose I've always stuck to basic principles, and I think sometimes my luck has come and people have helped me because I haven't ripped them off or done something terrible in the past.
Oh, I think integrity is a very important feature in any endeavour that you do. I think, if you're trying to start a business or you're trying to do anything else, people have to trust you. And there are people out there who gain trust by just being good at creating confidence where there's not a substantial foundation for it. But I think there's little that really substitutes having integrity through your career. And I've seen this with other people in the past. It's like some people will crap on people on the way up. Not realising that those people won't stay in that position, and that they may find one day that they're actually up a little higher. And then when they're in the position to decide whether you are or not the person to get crapped on, you've motivated them to crap on you.
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, I suppose, and also the other thing is, it's not, life isn't popular, and there's a big difference between popular, and to be fair, I won't be the most popular with people, but I think they would all say, whether they like me or don't like me, they would say that I have been, straight and honest with them. And I think you're absolutely right. If you treat people badly, it always comes round, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm reconnecting with some old colleagues from 30 years ago, and some of the conversations, some of it's been really positive, some of it's, do you remember in 1989 when you said this? And a colleague was telling me, an ex-colleague, she was telling me that apparently she came to me and asked for some more money, and my boss and I at the time said no, and she went off and cried, and then we made her apologise, and it was just like, oh, and I was like, I felt really bad about that, but then there are other really positive stories about how we help. So I suppose the lesson is, whatever you do, whatever action you do, whatever you say, it will come back, and it will come back and get you at some stage. And I'm no angel, and as you're right, I'm quite anti-authority, but equally, I suppose I have boundaries, and I think boundaries are a really important thing.
Principles is the word I use.
Yeah, well,
because the
values,
thing is, principles don't have to necessarily align with constructs, if you like. So there are authority constructs, but your principles might not align with it. But if you have principles and you stick to them, But I mean, I've always been quite a believer in the idea that if you have people working for you, they're not your underlings. They're people that you're there to either nurture or to help do their job.
Totally.
And like I was saying earlier about how these things what comes around goes around. There's like a guy who used to work for me when I was back in the day in the games industry, and I was running the department, and he came in as one of the juniors.
Yeah.
And that guy now runs his own company. Since I left games industry and I run a film company.
Yeah.
I've now filmed for him multiple times because we're friends from way back. But I don't think that if I treated him as an underling at the time,
totally,
he'd be looking at me now and going like, "Oh yeah, I want to work with you again." He'd be So I think you never know where people are going to end up, and it doesn't pay to just use people as assets to be used up as a resource.
No, and also as you get to my age, reality starts coming. You ain't going to be here forever.
Start fearing the reaper.
Reality check is, we don't. Nothing is certain, and you're right. And if you don't stick, I had a bit of a wobble. We'll talk about another day. A few years ago, and I had to go back to a bit of basics. Typical midlife crisis. And I did quite a lot of work on my values. And what I realised, is if I don't stick to my values, both in my personal and professional life, I ain't happy. And that's a really important lesson, and something again people don't talk about. Me. My values are sort of basic independence, new projects, and well-being. The moment my independence is threatened, and somebody starts telling me what to do, I'm like, ooh,
I think there's actually quite a thing to that because both of us have had times with our businesses and various other things where stress has been a part of it because it's unavoidable. And I think it's always easier to sleep on a clear conscience than it is to sleep on a bad conscience. And it's like, if you've got stress because you're like, I don't know how we're going to get to the end of this month. The business has not got, such and such client has disappeared and they haven't paid us. All those kinds of financial stress and everything else, they are difficult to manage. But I think nothing is harder to manage than having a nagging conscience. Yeah, and I think there's an awful lot of that to it. It's like you might miss out on something, or you might have to pass up an opportunity because it doesn't align with your conscience.
Yes, or your values.
Or your values. Yeah, and I think it's easier to, I've turned down clients because I don't agree. It's the modern age, and this is, I think, an important thing that people do need to grasp is that you can't separate yourself from the business entity that you're trying to be, because if you're running a business and then you think you're on your private Facebook or whatever else, and you're ranting some right-wing bigotry or something. I'm not saying everyone who's right-wing is bigoted, but I just mean if you're espousing some extremist ideology, it comes back to bite you. And I have a few clients who I've decided not to work with because I've seen their online content and gone, I don't really want to be associated with this.
But also I think, it comes down to, I think, if I look back over my career, a lot of the problems I've created have been my own making because I have done that. I have dealt with somebody that perhaps is known as a slow payer, or somebody that I don't actually get on with. And I think the other thing, I've had to learn to take responsibility because it's very easy to be the victim. I know, where am I, and I'm in this mess. Most of the time I've been in the mess is because I've either not stuck to my values or I've gone off-piste. And I think that's the other thing. And
it's that luck thing. I mean, sometimes it plays out. I turned down a client because I saw on their private Facebook that they were quite significantly racist. And I thought, well, I don't want to work with somebody who's racist. I just don't want to have that association because if something blows up and they end up in the news or whatever else, I'm now associated with them, and that you get you catch most.
Yeah.
But also, I want a
Bit
clear conscience of knowing that I haven't been supporting somebody who fundamentally I don't agree with ideologically.
Yeah.
But because I turned that client down, and it was quite a big job, it was a one-off job, but because I turned that down, something else came up that I now had the time to do, and that ended up being a recurring client. That I had for 3 years.
Yeah, well, there you go.
You know,
and that says it all. And that's basically, I suppose...
I don't really believe in karma, but I do feel like karma gave me a nod there, you know?
Yeah, but I don't think it is karma. I think it's basically you create your own destiny. And I think what I'm realising late in life is, that if I play the oh, woe am I and how terrible my life card is, that's what happens. When I'm more positive and I'm actually sticking to my values and boundary, actually it's a more positive outcome.
Yeah.
So I suppose the point of this podcast is really to share this journey that we've both been on and the lessons we've learned and some of the mess ups along the way. And I don't know, people can pick out of it what they want. But I
mostly
suppose
your lessons, because you're so much older than me.
I'm so much older than you, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I look on this video and I realise just how old I look. But
but weathered.
Well, we're on 30 minutes now, so I suspect you're now going to.
I'm going to tie up. I think we'll leave it there because there's been some interesting points come up. So
should we talk about values next time? Perhaps we get a bit more on values and how that.
Yeah,
fits
I think
in.
we'll get into the next one. We'll talk a bit about that, and also I think we need to kind of touch on, because we talked about you as a person, we talked about you as a business. But we kind of need to talk about what exactly it is you're trying to achieve and why we're even doing this podcast and what it's aimed at.
Yeah.
But I think because we're currently in the winter months, which means we're sitting in a shed. But like a lot of the things we're going to cover includes agriculture in terms of the environment and the wider kind of thing like that. We're going to talk about a lot of this stuff about how you're looking to try and help people to take whatever it is their idea, and it doesn't have to be agriculture related.
No.
To take that and to turn it into something bigger, and we'll kind of like dig into some of that. But I think in future podcasts we'll probably try and be out in the world a little bit more and try.
I get a bit fed up with this sat round. Yeah, it's a bit weird, isn't it? This sort of sat. It's quite a nice day today after yesterday, but okay.
But like we can't just sit in a shed and talk on the Seedy Podcast. So
I'm not really not sure about the name, but anyway, I'll go with the children's suggestion. But it was brilliant. Well, thank you for that.
No
we'll
worries.
look forward to the next one.
We'll do the next one soon.
Cheers.